This is a 3D printer, and it's key to what I've got to say today. But for the moment, I'm just going to pause it, and we'll get back to it later. So, the story I've got to tell today is about the difference between animate matter and inanimate matter. What is the difference is something I want to consider, and how far can we go into walking into the territory of understanding animate matter enough to replace our own body parts, in fact, to make ourselves live longer. We'll get there via a 3D printer. But before we do, I just want to introduce a very beautiful demo. This is a strange liquid. And it just looks like some sort of oil. Now, let me just take this around here so you can have a look at it. And I picked up a magnet on my way. Now, can you see that? It's just a bit of oil. But now, it turns into something else. Something oddly kind of organic. And if I take the magnet away again, back to being just mundane black liquid. And now, it sort of becomes alive. And you can do all sorts of things with it. There's something strangely compelling about it. It will, yeah, phew, I haven't really tried that, but anyway, yeah. It's mysterious. It deserves an explanation. And I hope to give you one. And the explanation is about matter, about what it is, and how can it get its marvelous properties. This is a particularly good example of a marvelous, wonderful property. But actually, the stuff around you, all this stuff here, is no less wonderful. It's just that it's hard to understand the stuff because most of it is sort of just seems like white, blobby, red, blobby stuff, or metal, blobby stuff. And oh, that's a good idea. I'll pour some water. This is not a demo. I'm just done. OK. So I want to just talk about what materials are for those here who are not used to thinking about them, because that's totally fine. I mean, when we're young, we put them in our mouths, we kind of break them a lot, and after that, essentially, we're done with materials, aren't we? But for the rest of us who are in material science, we spend our whole lives thinking about them, and this is essentially how we sort of think about them. And it's not immediately intuitive way of thinking about the world, which is that the world is of materials, of stuff, has different scales to it. And those scales are absolutely key to understanding how they work. So this is a diagram, and it looks kind of complicated. At the top, you've got big things. And as you go down the diagram, you get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And I've divided it up into animate world over here, basically the way that we are built. And of course, at the top, you have people. And here we are. We move around. We have clothes on, unlike those guys. But I didn't want to get into fabrics. It's another story. Fashion. Yeah, it's a completely different world. Although, no, anyway, let's not go there. Favorite of mine. Then, of course, there are big things that you kind of notice as you get, to organs. And then organs are connected by pipes and tubes and things. And then as you kind of get, if you go down the scales, you have things like tissues. Now, tissues are made up of multicellular materials, and if you look at those, you find individual cells, and here you can see some blood cells, and these are kind of the Lego kit of the biological world, and everything, we're made of cells. All biological animate materials are made of cells, and if you go inside the cells, you get something that is as wonderful as a city, and as complicated as a city. And then if you go right into the middle of those, you get the nucleus and you get the DNA. And the wonderful thing about sort of the animate material world is that if you change the DNA, it isn't that you instantly change your eye color or you instantly get cancer. It's that actually you change every single structure up this kind of nested structure of our materiality. And the same is the other way. So if you suddenly start living in a desert, your environment affects how your organs function, it affects how they connect up, it affects the sort of tissue and it affects the genes that are turned on. So there's a communication up and down the scales in your body. You are a multi-dimensional living, animate being. Its complexity. Now, if you were to point to where life is, what is life, well, it's very hard to really identify what is life, because any one of those scales is to be understood completely by physics. And that's where the inanimate side of this diagram starts to make some sense. So you can take something like a robot or an iPhone. These are very complicated things. They're very impressive things. And as you go down the scales that make them work, you can understand each individual part of it. You can understand the little wires. You can understand the tiny little machines inside them. You can understand the tiny little crystal structures. This little slab-like thing on the right here is a transistor. There's billions of them in your mobile phone, billions in this computer. And then we get to the nanoscale, and we get to the atomic scale. And each one of those scales we've started to understand, we've started to master. And in fact, the nanoscale is the key to understanding this demo. So the reason you can make a liquid behave magnetically and to be confined by a magnetic liquid is that tiny little magnetic particles of a nanoscale so small that they don't inhibit the fact that it behaves as a liquid. They're tiny, tiny, tiny things. And they would normally get ripped out of the liquid by a magnetic field because they're little tiny magnets. But they've been engineered to have a layer on the outside of them which is sticks to the liquid. So it's got a surfactant, essentially. And that means that it likes to be in the liquid more than it likes to be ripped out of them. And so instead of being ripped out, these little particles pull the liquid with them. And so they mimic the way the magnetic field makes them behave. And they get completely confined by it. And so understanding the nanoscale, in this case, makes you understand this demo. But it also starts to make you realize that there's so much more you could do if you could do what nature does, which is not just understand each individual scale and therefore make a computer or a robot or a mobile phone, but actually, what's to stop us crossing over this dividing line and replicating animate matter or replacing animate matter? And that's really what I want to talk about. OK, that's the introduction. Now, I want to talk about this subject with regard to a very special person. And that person is me. No, I'm joking. No, well, I'm going to talk about me. And I'm also going to talk about you. I want to talk about our shared history and the kind of things that material scientists, in a sense, have already done in trying to cross that boundary between the inanimate and the animate. And you might think, well, it's got nothing to do with me. What's he talking about? Is he some sort of cyber person? I've always suspected so. He talks in a very strange way. But no, it's not that. I think you'll recognize what I've got to say. But before I do, I just wanted to give you a bit of history, which is that when I was a kid, I have 3 brothers, and we used to watch this TV program. And those of you who haven't ever seen this intro to this program need to watch this and enjoy it. Those of you who have seen it, just revel in that moment where you were at home watching the TV. This TV series came on called The $6 Million Man. Can you feel your heart beating faster? Yes. This was just so exciting. So the plot is that Lee Majors is an astronaut. He has a terrible crash. I can hardly contain my excitement at this point, but I'm sitting in my seat. He's basically dead. Barely alive. Yes. Be that man. Better. Stronger. Faster. And then we used to run around the house. Because this bit goes on for a bit and it hasn't started yet. Sit down, sit down. And we're really living it. We're really living it. And we believe that this is the future. We believe that this is true. And of course, why wouldn't you? And so let's see how far it was really true. Not long after I started watching that TV program, I was getting some apples from the apple tree. This is me up a tree. And I fell off, broke my leg. And I was taken to hospital, and my brother's in the car, Peugeot 504 purple, you know, the 3 tiers, we're all in the car shouting, "We can rebuild him." Better, stronger, faster. And I was like not even in pain, because I was like, I'm going to be a bionic man. And then we get to the hospital, and I get seen by the doctor, quite slowly actually, and they say, yeah, you've broken your leg, and I'm like, well, are you going to rebuild me? And they say, yeah. What we're going to do is we're going to put some plaster around your leg, and your body will rebuild itself. I'm like, that's a real cop-out, isn't it? That's budget cuts, that is. I'm not going to be better. I'm not going to be faster. I'll be less better, and I'll be less fast, which turned out to be the case. But nevertheless, it is the technology they employed is an ancient technology. It was first employed by the Egyptians with wax and honey and bandages, and the Greeks. And then there was this breakthrough moment. The Turkish realized that you could get gypsum and you could put it around these fabrics, and it would add water, and you'd get this hardened plaster. And actually, if you just immobilize the leg itself, then it will just heal itself. The body is that clever. And I am, as you can see, able to walk. Maybe not better, faster, stronger, but I am able to walk. And this is a real testament. And before this time, you know, most of the people who broke their legs, and it must have happened all the time, that was it, you were lame for life. Because most people weren't able to sit still and have their leg completely immobilized for months that you required to do. Well, this material was really amazing, because I could walk around, and yet it would remain rigid. So although it was perhaps a disappointing moment in my life, I started to believe that materials were important. But this is just acting as a scaffold. The next thing that happened was that I had many encounters with different sticks and things, usually through my brothers, and I also got stabbed, which wasn't my brothers, or at least it definitely wasn't them. Anyway, but essentially I'm still able to get around now, and that's because if you stitch a wound together, it will heal itself. It's a remarkable material, the skin. And then I had a really bad football injury, and I broke my anterior cruciate ligament. For those, yes, there's a few going. And when you can't walk, you really know that life is just so much more difficult. And in the end, I had a replacement cruciate ligament put in. A piece of my hamstring was taken out, and 2 titanium screws, to this day, you can't see it, but anyway, are in there, and they are basically allowing me to walk, run, and most crucially, ski, to not a very high standard, but at least I have a good time. And again, titanium's another, who would have thought a screw would be able to do that? And a titanium screw seems like a mundane object, but it is one of the few metals that can survive in the body and probably will it will outlive me. I mean, it'll be as pristine as it went in, and that's a remarkable thing. But last but not least, this is probably any of you, and this happened to me about a few months ago again, any of you who suddenly has a piercing pain in their mouth and realizes that something's gone horribly wrong, either you've got a cavity or something has chipped off your tooth, you realize that our ancestors lived with toothache day in, day out. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And although they did try things like, in fact, in the end, they were trying things like putting gold, if you could afford it, gold foil on top of the cavities. Of course, they pulled the teeth out if they could, but that was extraordinarily painful, no anesthetic. And then they also tried pouring lead, molten lead, into the cavities. Again, it didn't work so well because it didn't bond at all to the enamel or to the dentine. So in the 1840s, an amazing piece of material science comes along, which is that you take mercury, a liquid metal, a really remarkable metal, a beautiful, fantastic metal, and the only metal that's liquid at room temperature. And then what you do is not the only metal, the only element that's liquid metal at room temperature. Okay, that's just to stop emails. And you add small amounts of alloy, silver, copper, zinc, and what you get is you get a reaction between those metals, and it will turn into another metal that's still ductile, still hard, but actually is solid. And that reaction doesn't take very long. It takes about 30 seconds if you get it right. And so that means you can make up something that's a liquid, put it into the cavity, and in about 30 seconds' time, it's hard and it's a solid. And it will remain solid for the rest of your life and is very hard, and very durable. And without that material, my God, how much pain would we all have suffered over the years? And I want to show you what it looks like. I've got this little microscope here. Now that's not sticking to my my tooth at all. That's actually, it's only a mechanical pressure. So you have to do an undercut in order to get it to stay that long in there. And yet it is a remarkable material, and it doesn't leach out, or there's almost no evidence that it leaches out, even though it's mercury, right? An element known to be poisonous and highly toxic. And so, you know, I've been a recipient of many, in fact, dental implants. Now have these polymer UV cured ones, and also I got a zirconia crown the other day. You want to see it? Anyway, you probably don't want to see it, actually. But it really matches really well the other teeth. That's what I wanted to show you. But anyway, I'm not very good at. Yeah. So it's not just that we've gained from a huge amount of reduction in pain, but also greater aesthetics and therefore ability to do other things. Now, last but not least, the other bionic improvement I've had is my glasses, without which I'm not really that much good to people. And how many of us here rely on these things to see? And as you get older, your vision gets worse, really almost kind of without question. And so you're thinking about a few hundred years ago, most people after the age of 30 or 40 were essentially visually impaired by quite a chronic way. And so glasses and the ability to see really, it makes all the difference. So I am essentially a bionic man, not a very impressive one, and not, but I have been kind of enhanced by these different materials, and glass and lenses are just another one. That's kind of where I've come from, and I'm sure a lot of you have similar stories to those different implants, ACLs, glasses, teeth implants, and that sort of thing. But where are we going in the future? What is likely to be available to us soon? And I just want to sort of start talking about the kind of things that happen now, which is that if your hip goes now, you can have a replacement hip, and it is a very effective treatment. You can have a titanium implant, which is tailored to your exact geometry, and that's really important, and is a very durable material. But it is metal, and the cup is usually sort of a polymer, and these things don't last forever. And so, one hip goes in, and maybe 10 years later you have to have another hip go in, and so on. And so, although these are very impressive implants into the body, it's clear that what we really want to be able to do when someone's hip goes is to rebuild that bone. And the question is, can we do it? And it's funny, because a material that is really just around the corner to allowing this to happen is been around since the 1960s, and it was invented by a guy called Larry Hench. And what he did was he was at Vietnam, and he saw how many amputations there were, and he really wanted to do something about it. He started looking for materials that could be like bone, and he started playing around with glass, actually, and different sorts of glass. And he invented one, which I'm just going to show you under the microscope here, called Bioglass. Okay, here it is. And it's a very porous material and white. And I know it doesn't look like a glass, but it's an amorphous structure, and essentially is technically a glass. And he found something very remarkable about the properties of this material, which is that if you implant this into the body, or if you put stem cells onto it, those stem cells, they will develop into bone cells. And in doing so, they'll infiltrate the material, and they will replace it with bone. And it's kind of a miracle that this is possible. And it's partly to do with the way that cells work. Cells don't like to sit on most surfaces. They like to sit on the surfaces that they're used to sitting on, that they've evolved to sit on, or that, yeah, mostly those things. And and to find other surfaces that not only do they like to sit on, but actually will turn them into bone cells is really quite a remarkable thing. So along came this material called Bioglass, and it really opened up the idea that we could actually grow new bone within our bodies, and that sooner or later we could regrow hips and regrow legs and arms and fingers by using this material. Now, at the moment, it's used quite a lot in a powdered form to cement different implants into the body and so on. So it is already being used, but it's quite hard to use it in a kind of monolithic form to replace a whole bone or a whole hip, because actually, when you put that in, you then have to either completely immobilize the person, because it's just not strong enough to withstand the stresses that are put on it until the point it's replaced, which will take a few years. So trying to bridge that gap is obviously a big research goal, but it has opened up an enormous set of possibilities for biomaterials, as they're called. And just put that to one side for a minute, because that then started another train of thought. So it isn't just that bones are a chronic problem in the joints, but it's also things like the bits between them, so your cartilage. And I don't know if anyone here is suffering from arthritis or a degradation of the cartilage, but this is also a chronic problem, and it's extremely painful. And again, here you have a material that's not a rigid material, it's a very flexible material. It's actually more like a jelly, and I've got a bit of jelly here, okay, to show you. And jellies are really interesting materials because they sort of occupy this weird space between solids and liquids. And obviously, in the case of this jelly, there is a lot of water in there. But this water is not sloshing around. This water is somehow confined. But there isn't an outer skin that's confining it. It's an inner structure of this jelly that's confining the water. And that inner structure is made of little fibers of gelatin. And these are basically like a straw mesh inside this liquid, and they confine the water so well that it actually behaves like a solid and doesn't flow. Now, cartilage isn't so different from that, except that inside this kind of jelly-like structure, which has all these fibers that keep the whole thing in place, but also give it that softness, that flexibility, inside them are living cells. And those living cells, are constantly gardening the structure, and they're making it, replacing the collagen, which is the reinforcing fiber. And that ecosystem within your cartilage is what gives you your flexibility of movement. It gives you, and the ease without pain, because you've got these bones in your knees or your hips or your arms, which need this cushioning. So it's a brilliant material, it's a fantastic material, but once it's degraded, once that ecosystem is lost, it's very hard to get it back. In fact, it's sort of irreparable. And so what tends to happen is people get knee replacements, but they are nowhere near up to the scratch. So what you'd like to do is cross this inanimate-animate barrier and start to design gels that artificially have that ecosystem, and then be able to implant them back into people's knees, elbows, and joints, and therefore restore their mobility and defeat the arthritis. And that sounds like science fiction, but that is what a lot of people are working on now, and I can very confidently say that in 10 years' time, that is very likely to be a mature technology which is offered to you medically, because these things are now in kind of clinical tests. And what you see is, what the main problem is trying to get the cells inside these artificial polymer gels to live in a sort of ecosystem which they like. And on this picture here, you see these sort of pink cells living along, moving around in this kind of structure, which is like a sort of gel-like structure. And the question is, can you get to the point where those cells start to replace the polymer with collagen and start to garden their own organic cartilage-like material? Because once you've got to that point, then you've restored your cartilage altogether. And that now looks like a very promising prospect. And it all kind of boils down to understanding what environments cells like to be in and how they like to thrive and how they will build their own structures. And this whole area now is called material scaffolding. So in a way, you can think of your body, your organs, your legs, everything as these kind of these structures like houses. You know, they're very solid, they're very dependable, they have a particular structure. But they didn't get that way. They got that way by being built up with a scaffolding, so that all the bits of it could be put together. And then the scaffolding was taken away, and there they are. So this is the same idea. The idea is that you will provide a scaffolding for these replacement bits of your body. The scaffolding will help them being built, and then the scaffolding will dissolve away. So what could you do with that? Well, you think it's science fiction, but there is a patient living today with this technology in them. And if this patient lives a long and happy life with this replacement, then that really, really will be the best evidence we've got that it's going to work for a lot of other things. So this is a team from UCL who is a patient with a windpipe that was chronically damaged. And if you have a badly damaged windpipe, things are really difficult for you. You're going to have to either breathe through a pipe in your neck, and you're not going to be able to talk, or the problem is that you're going to die. So it's a big problem, I think you'll agree. The idea is, in fact, what they did do is they created a scaffold, right, for cells to grow to replace the windpipe. They then infiltrated that scaffold in what's called a bioreactor, which is like a little house which mimics the kind of humidity and temperature of the body. And they put cells from the patient in that scaffold, and they started to build its own windpipe again. And then they transplanted that into the patient. And as I said, this was done last year, and everyone's crossing their fingers that this is going to be an important clinical test of a major part of the body that's been replaced by this technique. Now, of course, you can see immediately what the problem is, that you might get this working for a year, and then maybe the whole thing will fall apart. Maybe they won't get enough blood supply. Maybe they won't be able to kind of really infiltrate into the rest of the body's systems. But this is the best hope so far. Now, what about other bits of the body that you could replace? This is another patient from last year who had a chronically diseased jaw, and the lady was so old that it was going to be very difficult to do any other treatment other than trying to replace the jaw itself. And so what they did is they did something really rather remarkable. They took an MRI scan of her jaw, they designed a replacement jaw, and then they printed it off. And this is it. Okay, this is a picture of the jaw that's printed and is in the patient now. And that is really remarkable. And that brings me to this rather great object here, which is a 3D printer by 3D Systems. And I'm just going to boot it up again. And we've got it printing these hands, and it'll start working in a minute. And I want to give you a tour of kind of what 3D printing is, because 3D printing is quite it's a new technology, and it's not something that everybody kind of immediately gets. And I'm just going to put a little camera on this. Is it looking for me? It's resuming. It's thinking. It's stuff. It's not easy to wake up. I know that. If anyone knows that, I know that. Okay. So here's my little camera. So look, while it's waking up, let me just take you on a little tour of it. So it is remarkably simple. So at the bottom here, so in fact, what am I saying? Let's hand out some of these printed parts to the audience so that you can see the kind of thing I'm talking about. So I'll hand one to you. Hand another one. No, it's really beyond. It's not a. Do you want to have a look? Yeah. These are not gifts, by the way. This is. And well, okay. They'll go back. Do you want? Oh yeah, you want another one up there? Yeah. No, it's coming. It's coming. I'm not going to throw it. Okay, here we go. We've met before, haven't we? Okay. All right. So have a look at these when they come out. Now, they start life as a coil like this. Okay, it's a polymer called PLA, polylactic acid, and this can be obtained from vegetables and normal organic matter. Now, here are the coils. Can you see them? Yeah. I'm going to focus it a bit better than that in a minute. There we go. OK, all right. Now, the hand that you've got around, and this hand here, started life as a 3D object in a computer, and then was put on a disk, and the disk is there, and that was fed into this bit of electronics down here. Now, what it's being told is that there is this object, and it's been divided up into little layers. And when you see the hand coming around, you'll see, if you look very carefully, at about a resolution of about 0.1 of a millimeter, the hand has been basically sliced up into little layers. So these layers are digitally exist in this computer here, and it's going to try and turn this material into those layers. It's going to print a layer, and then it moves, as you can see here, right? It's printing one layer, and then it moves this stage down, and then we'll print the layer above. Now, how does it control the stage? Well, again, this electronics here is controlling some motors. There's a motor there. It's not really obvious. Let me just point at it. Sorry, terrible camera work. There's a motor there, which is controlling the Z-axis. There's a motor there, which is controlling the X and Y. And you can see it's just rubber sort of gearing going on here, which is moving it back and forth. So this bit of electronics down here is basically telling the print head where to go on that one layer and printing out. Now, how does it print? Well, that's kind of remarkably simple too. Up here, you can see something whirring, and that's turning a bit of screw, which is pushing a little bit of this material through into the nozzle below, and the nozzle heated up, and they heat it up to twice the melting point of the material, and that squirts it out onto the bits where it knows it should squirt it out, and it doesn't squirt it out, hopefully, on the bits it shouldn't. And then, because it's twice the melting point of the material, it heats the bit below, which was printed, let's say, a minute before, and that allows the two to bond really well. Now, let me just show you something else about this, because it's kind of cool. If I just pause it for a minute, I know that's really unfair, and take, all right, and take off. It's so beautifully simple, you've got to see this. Because what's so great about this technology is you think it's high-tech, it is kind of high-tech, but it's also really low-tech, which basically means that it's going to be available to everybody, every school, every person, potentially, quite robust material as well. So here we go. That bit up there, which was turning, is just turning a screw. Where is the screw? There is the screw. Can you see it? And there is the material coming down, being fed into it. So basically, the screw's turning, and it's just pushing it. That's all that's pushing it down. Beautifully elegant design. So if I now get it going again, OK, it'll take some while. And you can see here fans and things like that, which are to cool the material once it's on it, so in order to get that to sort of solidify. And essentially, that is it. And yet you can print, as you can see, very complex-looking things. Here's a head of Walt Disney. So that's a revolutionary object. This is a revolutionary thing because good timing. Before I go on to that, let me just show you. That's hands and stuff, but I've got some other objects over here which have been sintered with a 3D printer, and I need the, what's this called? The visualizer? Yeah, great. I just want to show you that you're looking at something that's sort of monolithic. Here is a piece of chain mail, right, with moving parts. Okay, so that was printed in one piece. Okay, that level of delicacy and the ability to have moving parts is already possible. Watch this. Well, I don't, in a minute, as he zooms in. Okay, this is printed in one piece with cogs. Right, it's not assembled, this is printed as this. Now, you're wondering how it gets the bits in between. They're printed with a scaffold material in the middle, so you can get the right gaps, and then that scaffolding material is dissolved away in water. But you start to see that this, what appears to be a very straightforward piece of technology, can just do, it's going to be disruptive. It can change a lot of industries, not just healthcare. And I just want to show you one more. This is from one of the latest 3D printers at UCL in the Bartlett. This is a many material printer. And you can see the kind of intricacy and the ability to change geometry and the surface finish that you can get. So this is many different polymers, actually, in this case. So just to give you a flavor of the fact that we're talking about healthcare, there is just, there's, you could print out potentially, lots of the objects we have in our houses, cutlery. Maybe you could make your own cutlery. Maybe you can make your own cups, your glasses, toothbrush, your own phone. This is all becoming potentially possible. But in that case, you have to compete against industries that are making the same object, like a pen. Let's say you want to make a pen. Well, clearly this can make a pen. You just need a thing that can make a tube and a print head, and then you need something that can print the ink or at least deposit the ink. It doesn't seem like it's going to be impossible, right? But you have to compete against industries who are printing mass-producing pens, and the question is, economically, will that ever be viable? But in the case of healthcare, what this technology really wins at is that you don't want a jawbone that's been printed, mass-produced, and then to like your shoes, right? 8.5, yeah, just put up with it. No, I want the jaw for my jaw, okay? So this can do it, right? You do an MRI scan or a CAT scan, you take that digital file, and you print it out exactly. And that's where it's really going to win, big time. And all right, so here's a patient who's had a jawbone printed. Could you print a liver? Could you print a kidney? Because those are the areas which are really starting to become a huge demand. The people, I don't know if anyone here is on dialysis, is waiting for a replacement organ of any kind. It's extremely difficult for those patients. It's their only hope of a normal life. If you get a transplant, you have to wait for years, and then you have to have immunosuppressant drugs, which have other side effects, and you have to take them for the rest of your life, and probably, if you're a young person, you're going to have several transplants in your life. It's a very, very difficult road. The black market has started up in those organs, and at the moment, I don't know if anyone knows the price of a kidney, if you want to buy one from the black market. Anyone want to hazard a guess? How much you could buy an organ for if you were if you were willing to fly to the Middle East or India or China? $2,000, yeah, that's about roughly it, yeah. So, you will pay more than that. The person whose kidney will be donated will probably get that amount of money, and they may not even get that money because two of you will have to meet in a hospital in the middle of nowhere, and you'll never meet them, and you'll receive their kidney or their liver. And it's a very difficult business, and this is not going to go away. People live longer lives. They don't want to have to curtail their lives because they've lost their kidneys or their livers or had them, for whatever reason. So the idea that you might be able to not just print a windpipe, but you might be able to print a liver or a kidney, this is being taken very seriously. Now, I say it's been taken seriously, people are just rigging up printers and printing. And it's not going to work. That approach is just definitely not going to work for the reasons that we've already talked about, which is that cells just don't like that kind of behavior, and they'll probably all just die. But people are printing cells. Now, what you need to do, of course, is to create an environment in which cells like to be in, and then hopefully you've got a chance. And although it's still early days for this thing, a sort of mini industry is growing up because there is so much demand and because there is a tantalizing cross-correlation between this technology and cell culture technology and stem cell technology and scaffolding technology, in particular scaffolding technology. So we talked about how brilliant Bioglass is, but that monolithically it's brittle, and therefore you might have, it's quite hard to replace large bones with it. But what if you could create scaffolds that had a toughness and a strength that could last for longer than a few years, enough time for your body to essentially grow their own back? Then you might be printing it on this kind of machine, right? You might be printing the scaffold in exactly the shape and size that you need for your patient, then doing exactly what they did with the windpipe, which is infiltrating with stem cells from your own body, doing a bioreactor on it, and then implanting it. If you did all that, there is a chance it's going to work. And the holy sort of grail of this area is a heart transplant, because heart disease is rife. Heart transplant, you only have one, so it's even more critical. And this is the state-of-the-art synthetic heart here. And this is the alternative. And so if you find yourself in this position, you don't have that many choices. You have to wait for a transplant heart. You may not get one before dying. You can put this synthetic version in, and I think the record for someone living with one of these in is a year. So it's really, these things are being driven by people's, by the fact that it's tantalizingly close, and yet there's just huge amounts of science, both from the material science point of view and the biology and the medics to do. Of course, when you start looking at something like as complicated as a mechanical heart, you bulk a bit. You think, can that really be possible? Because now we've got something that's got to, it's got to have really huge, quite large stresses on it and survive for a long period of time. And if it stops, then that's it. So the stakes are big. So what is the future? What is the future of this technology? What is our future? Will we be the bionic men and women of the future? So I thought I'd just spend a few minutes kind of thinking about that, because although what I've been talking about seems like sci-fi, there are thousands and thousands of scientists and medics and material scientists and biologists working on these technologies and putting them into practice. Now, this is a picture of my grandfather who died quite a long time ago, and this is with my mum, who died unfortunately last year. And these sort of things really remind you of our mortality, right? They kind of make you think, wow, we've all got a limited lifespan. But they also remind you of something else. My grandfather really shrank. He was a big man, and he got smaller and smaller. And the question is, will we be able to hope to be, he died when he was 96, will we hope to be able to be 96 and be playing tennis, going skiing? Because essentially, although I've talked about the life and death scenarios, the truth is that actually the bigger desire for all of us is we probably don't want to live forever, but what we do want to do is live a healthy life, for a long time, to be able to be mobile. Is that too much to ask? And I think that there will be an enormous demand for that. And sort of taking another tack, the technology around prosthetics has really come on quite a long way. Already you've got this material called carbon fiber, which is extremely strong and light and stiff, and this has made prosthetic limbs a lot more manageable. And now they're being integrated with electronics, so it can detect when you're about to take a step, and it can just change it slightly, the angle in which the foot hits the ground. And all these things are slight improvements in making the gait look much more natural. Textiles are being developed and clothes that you can wear, that they start to monitor your health, that they will, if you need certain drugs, they will be able to give you your drugs through your skin. And also for people who are very ill and unable to talk, it's often a big problem to know exactly how they're feeling or what's going on. And so clothes that sort of let's say that a diabetic has got low blood sugar, is these sort of things are starting to become possible. But one of the big issues around all of these kind of questions is that you can talk about an organ because it's a kind of thing, and you can talk about a heart or a liver, and you can imagine kind of making one and sort of implanting it. But then they have to be connected up to the system of your body, the thing that goes, to get the oxygen, to get rid of the carbon dioxide, to get the nutrients in, to get the waste out. And this system is a very wonderful and connected system. And this system is not something you can just take out and put another one in. This is completely integral to you. And so a big question is how to deal with that side of it. Running repairs, wholesale removal of certain bits of it, possibilities. Another possibility, and this is, it sounds fantastic, and I remember, you all remember this movie, I'm sure, The Fantastic Voyage, where you get this group of people who get shrunk down and they start traveling through in a little spaceship through, or submarine, through the veins, and there's all sorts of shenanigans and betrayal. Anyway, but people talk about nanotechnology and they talk about it like it's can be possibly like this. That actually, if you want to repair the network of blood or the network of capillaries, that you're going to have to somehow send something through these capillaries to do running repairs or find places that are blocked and to repair them. And although this sounds really like science fiction, it is actually happening. There are several research groups that I know of who are developing things called nanoparticles, which can be functionalized. And that means that they're tiny little particles, so they're just like the nanoparticles in this, which are, you just wouldn't know they're in there. There's a piece of liquid. As far as you know, there's nothing in there. So that can run through your body, no problem at all. It's full of nanoparticles. It can run through your body, no problem at all. And there's the evidence of the nanoparticles. Now, what if you could have a technology like that, which basically ran through your blood, but until it found something that shouldn't be there, and then it kind of stuck to it and maybe made it break off, or it kind of changed the chemistry a little bit, which made it more brittle, which meant it was washed away by the body. Those are kind of very passive ways of doing it, but that technology of functionalizing a nanoparticle, that is here today. That is really sophisticated. Soon you're going to see all sorts of blood testing, which is really just about these nanoparticles. You'll be able to put your blood into a solution which has got particular nanoparticles that are looking for a particular disease, and they'll change color because of the way that those nanoparticles will agglomerate and become a bigger particle. And because they become a bigger particle, it changes the color of the liquid. That technology is already going to happen. It's fully tested. So nanoparticles and the idea that you will, in a sense, maybe repair your body from the inside is something that I think has got, well, I can't really see any other way of doing it, because I think that this network, that even if you get to the point where you can repair or print a liver or print a kidney or even a heart, you've still got this problem that your network of blood vessels is going to be 96 years old, and that you really have to do something about that. Yeah, which brings me to Tony Nicholson, which is a very sad story of a man who went on holiday to Greece with his family, age 55, I think, and he woke up paralyzed from the neck down. Now, this could happen to any of us. This is just one of those things that can happen. And he just couldn't cope with it. I mean, and his family talked very frankly, and he talked very frankly about the fact that, some people who this happens to, they live full lives, and they're different lives, and they enjoy their kids' development, and they, because they're completely sentient, they're completely and utterly mentally active. But he couldn't cope with it, and he just wanted to die. He wanted to be put to sleep, and of course, the law in this country didn't and still doesn't allow it, and so he campaigned for that ability, and was in the end went to the High Court and lost, and then he died last year. Now, he basically had a nerve cord disorder, and actually, you can imagine that, it's something we all kind of fear, isn't it? Sort of paralysis at any stage of our lives. And the idea that we might come up with some technologies that actually could go in and connect up nerve cords and reconnect them, that seems to me a very valid thing to do. What we're talking about here is not about prolonging our lives so we live 500, 1,000 years old. What we're really talking about is a suite of technologies, one of which is printing, and the other is nanotechnology, which is about reducing these demons in our lives, the fate of going to Greece and waking up paralyzed. Those are the things we most fear, and those are the things that I think are legitimate things that I think we could have a go at trying to solve. And one of the solutions probably is going to be a melding of electronics and humans. And this is a piece of work from Brown University, and this lady has got brain implants. And what they do is they she thinks about certain actions, and the computer records those actions, and it translates it to some movement on a robotic arm. And she can think that she wants a drink, and the robotic arm, she can control the robotic arm in order to drink. And she's now, as the years have gone, I think it's the second year, she's got more and more functionality. So the ability just to, to cross that boundary between the electronic world or the synthetic world and the biological world, that is also coming on leaps and bounds. And, I think in some ways it will be a combination of these things that kind of extends our lives and kind of, I very much doubt that it'll just be using the biology's own repair work, for the very reason that we are this sort of grown structure, which is hard to, we're not a component built. And so we'll have to sort of have ad hoc solutions to our problems. And I think that sort of brings me to my sort of final, I think maybe it's a bit early. Maybe I'll spin this out a little bit. Oh no, wait, what? That's brilliant timing, I can't believe it. Let's have a hand for, yeah. Oh, there's been some problems, but it's still fairly impressive, I have to say. Yeah, there it is. That is an extraordinary thing, isn't it? That you can just print out an object like that in a very short period of time. I think that took a few hours to print. Okay, so we started this thinking about this by separating the world into the inanimate world and the animate world. And the animate world on this side, it's not just that so the physics is the same on both, right? Let's say. It could be that we're found to be wrong, but that seems the most likely thing, that actually the physics everywhere is the same. So what makes this alive on the animate world is I think, that it's a multiscale structure which communicates up and down the scales. And so when something happens at one of the scales, the other scales can change accordingly. They can react. They can change the structure. They can repair the structure. They can grow another structure. They can do any number of things. And that is a characteristic of life. But that's not the only thing that's different on that side. These structures here are grown. These are grown from a single cell. That's how nature builds stuff. They built you. You started from a single cell. They built a plant, started from a single cell. A whale. Everything on this planet starts from a single cell and is grown. And that is a particular way of building things. And it's a very different way of building things from the human technology way of building things. This phone, this computer, this printer, all built from components. You can take them apart. I took one of them out earlier. Bolts, nuts, bits of rubber. And actually, at a deeper level, these others are all getting componentized. So I talked about nanoparticles. Here they are, but they are components, right? They can be added or removed. A jelly, we have gelatin. We sort of add it to something. We make a material. We shape them. And that's a fundamentally different philosophy of making stuff. It means that when you repair something, you sort of take whole components out and you replace them. You rip a bathroom out, you rip a cupboard out, and you replace it with new cupboards. You take a toilet out, you replace it. You make a wooden bathroom for reasons that have become apparent. So then our way of thinking about the body, though, is sort of I think subtly influenced by the way that we make things, which is that we sort of feel like we are bits of components, and the fact that kidney transplants and liver transplants work at all is really kind of a miracle, in a way, right? It's really extraordinary that actually works. You probably bet against it working, but as we get to more sophisticated diseases and they're about the connectivity of the body. Things like respiratory and blood diseases and about, spinal cords. And that's all put in place very early on in development. That's what's so brilliant about biology. That's what makes it so evolvable, because small changes early on in the life of an organism can have huge changes in the way it functions and its structure. And that means levers can be pulled and you can change. You can build one thing one day, you build another thing another day with the same set of instructions. And that leads to evolvability. That leads to a world where, biology doesn't design things to last forever. It designs things to build a copy of themselves, and that's how you get longevity. And component construction is a completely different philosophy. So the question really does arise whether we should be. There's sort of two questions here. One is whether the fact that we've got these structures in us that were grown from when we were a single cell, 2 cells, an embryo, whether we can ever really hope to reverse time, whether actually what we're doing is tinkering with something that fundamentally there's going to be a real limit to. Or then we have to do the cyber option. So we have to actually just wholesale plug ourselves in to different technologies. And this is the prosthetic limb thing. This is the brain control thing. And they're sort of two different futures for us. There's a synthetic future, and there's a kind of using scaffolds and using 3D printers to just basically component repair our bodies. And sort of almost two different human existences, because if you go down one and you've got a set of people living to 150 via computers and via pumps and via prosthetics, and you have another set of people who don't do that, who are dying at the age of 80, 90, because that's essentially when the byways of your body essentially give up, and it's very difficult to repair them. Well, that's going to be philosophically and ethically very difficult for us to handle. On the other hand, you have this component construction, which we've really shown how brilliant we are at it. I mean, the mobile phone is sort of the ultimate expression of it. And we can talk to anyone in the world, any place, any time, with this tiny little object. What a triumph of component construction. Yeah, biology, you do that. Do you know what I mean? Although kind of pigeons can find their way. How to do that? But anyway. But could it be that this is also kind of, that this is also a sort of dead end, that component construction has its limits, and actually we should be mirroring biology and thinking about evolving, like growing objects. And as soon as you start thinking about that, you come back to the 3D printer, because a guy called Adrian Byrne in Bath University had the very same thought about this. He saw this thing, and he thought, do you know what, this gives birth to another object. In this case, a hand. In that case, a kind of funny thing with lots of... But anyway, what if it gave birth to a little version of itself? Could that be possible? And it's called, he created this 3D printer called RepRap. And what it does is it's made of components it can build itself, which means that you could give it to someone, and they could build another one from it, and then they could give it to someone else who could build another one from it. And now, although it has its limitations at the moment, because some of the key components are not able to be built, like the electronics and like the computational parts and some of the motors, actually he's onto something really kind of fundamentally amazing, which is that if we could get printers to print electronics, and which I think is going to come, and so you get to the point where you can build something as sophisticated as a phone, so that you no longer buy a phone anymore, you just buy the information to build a phone, and then you print one out, then actually you could actually change the whole way this world works. It's really quite an amazing idea of a disruptive technology, and so yeah, it is something really wonderful to behold. That here we are standing in front of this machine, which as I've said before, could be a big part of our lives. Could end up printing an organ for us at some point in the future, or a jaw or a leg even, But more than that, it could change the whole way that our sort of economy operates and how we build things. And I feel like, well, we're standing in the Faraday Lecture Theatre, where Faraday, gave his talks on evenings just like this, 180 odd years ago, which is a pretty amazing honour, I have to say. And I think if he was alive today, he would have one of these. I think he would be playing with this technology, because I think it has got so much to offer, and it's so fascinating, and it really can take us in so many different avenues. So yeah, I give you the 3D printer, and oh, that wasn't the real bell, was it? And or was it? It was good. And thank you for listening.